Hey everyone, welcome back to Elevate Your AIQ. Today I'm joined by Phil Wilson, CEO of LRI Consulting Services, founder of Approachable Leadership, and author of many books, the newest of which is The Leader Shift Playbook. Phil's unique perspective bridges leadership, labor relations, and organizational culture, all through the lens of decades of hands-on consulting experience. We talk about what it takes to lead in a world that's rapidly being reshaped by AI, not just in terms of tools and tasks, but in how leaders show up, build trust, and develop people. From the labor market to leadership development, we explore how AI can free up time for more human connection, how it might reshape the role of managers, and why storytelling and authenticity are still our most powerful tools. It's a wide-ranging and grounded conversation about the future of leadership and the mindset shifts needed to meet the moment. Let's get into it. Thanks again for listening. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I'm your host, Bob Pulver, and with me today, I have the pleasure of speaking with author Phil Wilson. How you doing today, Phil?
I'm doing great, Bob. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Why don't you just take a minute to introduce yourself and what you've been doing throughout your career and the impetus for your latest book?
Yeah, sure. So I am the CEO of a company called LRI Consulting Services, and then I founded Approachable Leadership, which is the sort of the leadership arm of our consulting work. I started out in life as a labor lawyer, and my company, LRI Consulting Services, was started by my dad 47 years ago. So I kind of came back home in the very late 90s to join the family business. We're still a family-owned company, and my job is to try to get us to like the next 40 years. But anyway, that's a little bit about my background. I practice law. We've done a lot of work as a labor lawyer. A lot of my work intersects with companies that are dealing with unions, and I know that's probably one thing that we'll talk a little bit about later today. And then because of that work, union campaigns tend to happen when there's leadership failures. And so as I kind of grew in my practice and consulting work, kind of at the intersection of a leadership train wreck, I got interested in leaders and what makes leaders great, what makes leaders fail. And so that path then got me into the writing about leadership. My last book is called The Approachability Playbook. My upcoming book is The Leader Shift Playbook. But anyway, that's sort of my my long and winding road to being a leadership author.
Yeah, I think and we're of course going to weave in, how this all plays out in the age of AI. Is sort of a running theme here, but I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from, what has worked in the past, how leadership has needed to sort of evolve in terms of the characteristics and skills that folks need, the amount of information and the complexity of information that people need to pay attention to. And then these days, of course, how do we balance, responsibility with innovation? How do we maintain and be the best, humans as we try to automate things and augment our own, thinking and our own work?
I mean, AI has, your regular listeners, if they see, my bio and kind of like what's going on, they might be like, why should I listen to this guy? But like the AI, the impact on the labor market, which is a big part of the work that we do, but the impact on the labor market, which is ultimately the impact on jobs, that's a huge storyline. Leadership is going to transform with these tools. And then, of course, producing content and writing books and things like that are also transformed by these tools. So there's a massive amount of intersect between just how rapidly technology is evolving and these critical sort of pieces of how do we lead, as you say, how do we lead humans in this world, and how are jobs going to change with these tools, and then how does that transform the labor market and economies?
Yeah, absolutely. I also think about, some of the work that obviously the World Economic Forum often focuses on, which is, future of jobs, future in-demand skills and things of that nature. And once again, this year, if you look at the top sort of in-demand skills for 20, well, we're in 2025 now, but even looking out to 2030, none of them are
Mm-hmm.
technical skills. Like, I don't think one of them. The only one that even mentions technology is technology literacy, which is
Yeah.
part of, us adapting and moving towards that and understanding how to use it, when to use it, and leaders, need
Mm-hmm.
that literacy as much as anybody to make sure that they know how to position themselves for, strong leadership, to
Mm-hmm.
recognize what skills are important at an individual and team level. And I know we'll get into all of that, but certainly everyone needs to understand, how this sort of changes the game and how they need to adjust,
Yeah.
I suppose.
And one of the ways I think about this is like this this technology and other technologies before it, but this, what it does is there's lots of the people stuff that like we never get to because, we're doing mundane tasks and we're sort of being crushed by, just like minutia all day, that freeing of a lot of that type of stuff, which is, I think, one of the big promises of AI is that like a lot of these sort of menial, not very engaging, not, like tasks that really are frustrating and kind of, not very high value, that those can be done so that now, the humans can do the things that like only humans really can do. And so I think there's obviously glass half empty, components to this story as well. But one of the things as a leadership, consultant and thinker is that's exciting to me is that there's a lot of this work that just kind of doesn't happen, that now there's going to be like margin for it to occur. I think that's exciting.
Yeah, I think it remains to be seen how different organizations take advantage of those efficiency gains, or
Mm-hmm.
cost savings, cost avoidance. Like, how do you sort of reinvest
Yeah.
some of that? I mean, certainly you want to, take the win, as it were, and recognize that to, shareholders. But how are you reinvesting that in either additional, efficiency gains? But how are you reinvesting that across both, maybe additional technology investments? But how are you reinvesting really in your most valuable asset, which is
Mm-hmm.
still the human,
Yeah.
talent that you have, so that they can continue to thrive? And I know that's trickier in certain environments and in certain types of roles in industries, right? So, I mean, certainly your working and writing about,
Mm-hmm.
unions and, their sort of, bargaining power, and what does that leave them to do? I guess I'm curious to get your perspective on some of that, because I think about, I have friends in the entertainment industry that work sort of
Mm-hmm.
behind the scenes, and sometimes I do get concerned on their behalf about, well, we talk about taking some of these things away and allowing people to move up to higher value kinds of things, but there may not be as big of an opportunity
Yeah.
there for deskless workers, as
Mm-hmm.
you might call them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll comment on that. I think, I mean, it's certainly a valid concern. I think that like historically, what has happened is worth paying attention to, which is that when we add these new technologies and we add, efficiencies, it doesn't lead to like massive unemployment. What ends up happening is that like businesses are adapting. That there are some efficiencies and there are some people that are no longer doing the work that they were doing before, but the innovation leads to like other jobs that we haven't even imagined today that would, that develop because of technological advances. And then the other piece that I would say is that, we're in a historically tight labor market, and if you look at like birth rates and sort of like, meta trends, we're we're running out of workers. So the part of this story is like we really need, if you're thinking ahead to like 2030, 2040, we're going to be in an environment where you're going to need technology to replace a lot of what people are doing just because there's not going to be people to do it. And then you can layer on top of that, if you want, like, sort of the current, politics around immigration. But, if you're going to like remove massive chunks of people out of the labor market, like that just intensifies that labor issue. So we just experienced this through the pandemic, right? Like a massive number of people, that were most likely going to be working for 5 or 10 more years, like, left the labor market. That creates, there's a giant leadership vacuum that occurred because of that. And it certainly also led to, increased leverage. So, like, the reason unions are so much in the news now and sort of like have increased in popularity, part of that story is the labor market that sort of came out of the pandemic. But it is still going to be the case that, like, this tight labor market means you're going to need to come up with technological ways to, make each human that's still working, more and more efficient and capable of doing more, production and having, more value. That's only going to accelerate.
Yeah, and it's no surprise that people are concerned about that. I think that as we look, and certainly we've had all kinds of technological advancements over the years, and people have had to adapt. But there's always that initial, sort of who moved my cheese kind of thing, right? Like, where does this leave me? What else can I do? I mean, it's easy to say, oh, there's always more things to do, always more problems to solve or whatever. But when it comes down to each individual, you've got to say, well, where does this leave me? Or how do I best, maybe how do I use AI to figure out what my next move is one, sort of personal use case. But I think you're hitting on a lot of I had a filmmaker on the show recently who really focuses on, partly from his military background, but this sort of VUCA environment, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. There's just a lot going on, and all these factors, sort of contribute to people's fears.
I mean, look, if you're on team, I don't want anything to change, and I just want to keep doing this one thing that I've done for, the last decade, and I don't want it to, like, move, then this is not really a great environment for you. But one of the things I think that's, like, exciting about AI, that in a way that's, like, very different than, so if you think about sort of like the personal computer and all the efficiencies that were gained by that, and then the internet after that, one of the things that's been, economists will talk about, there was this expectation that, like, productivity was going to explode by some of these prior technological changes, and it didn't really turn out that way. And there's a lot of theories about, like, why that didn't really happen. This is, I think, a point where I do believe that this is going to change the game around how much an individual can produce and how much value an individual can create. And I think we're just, like, barely scratching the surface of it. But even things like filmmaking, like gaming, creative spaces like that. And again, there is some gnashing of teeth about, like, well, is this going to replace the people that do that work? I don't believe that, like, AI anytime soon is going to, replace human creativity. I think it's going to be capable of doing a lot of, like, rote things that, like, if you went through someone's day, the kinds of stuff that, like, they grit their teeth and do and roll their eyes about having to do, writing code from scratch, or, testing a game, or, things like that. There's stuff that look, like, you can sort of brute force that with humans, but it's not really very engaging work. It's really not very, like, high value the time invested doesn't compute to like the value that gets created. And like if you can make that more efficient, that job is more fun. It's like you're not stuck trying to brute force it. You can spend that time really creating. And that I think is sort of where, that's where the story heads, I believe. Unions, if you kind of like, so like there was a writer's strike, big writer's strike last year that was really centered around this issue of how AI was going to be used. But I think it's a little bit telling, like they weren't dying on the hill of like, we can't use AI. And the reason why is because they know it actually makes the jobs easier. They're just like, we don't want to lose our jobs. And this is a very like union thing, right? We,
Sure.
we just don't want to lose our jobs. And if we use AI to create something, we still want to get credit for it. Like that was more what was getting negotiated in those agreements. And unions will sort of do everything that they can. Like the dock workers is a good example. Like they will hold the line on automation and anything that could potentially reduce the number of people in any way to do a particular job. And they have a profit motive to do that, right? Every single one of those people pays dues money to that union. So like they do not want to use less people, and they will fight hard, and say all kinds of crazy stuff to like, create like, oh my gosh, like the sky is totally falling, there's going to be nobody doing work. Like, they drum up sort of like the worst case scenario as a way to get, a contract provision that is just trying to kind of keep a company, stuck decade before. And what ends up happening is like those companies fail eventually. Like, you're still competing against other people that are going to take advantage of this technology. So like you like the buggy whip, union, eventually goes away when everyone's driving cars.
Right. Yeah, I think in some ways it's, even if it's not, hitting them immediately, it's like, well, this isn't a good sign for what's to come. Like if you start doing this set of tasks, what's next, right? And so we see that all the time. Oh, now that this is advancing, now that this can do, this task, now that it can, dynamically translate, languages, now that it can take a still and make a movie out of it, or take a 5-second, maybe 10-second, recording of your voice, and then just, have you, some digital version of you just, recording a full, audio track or whatever. I mean, I've seen some of those.
Or create a podcast.
Exactly. Yeah, that's an actually really interesting one. Like, you basically take any document and throw it into something like Google Notebook LM, and all of a sudden you have two AI voices having a conversation about the document.
Right. Michael on my team, who introduced us, he sent me a 10-minute podcast one night that was generated in seconds that was about my book. And I was like, wow, like, who are these two? Like, how do they even know about my book? Yeah. And it was an engaging and pretty good discussion. Now, just like anything with AI, there was a few hallucinations in this discussion, and there were some things that they got wrong, but like in general, it was pretty great. Like but again, those sort of exceptions are why, like, I don't think it's going to replace, you and me talking.
Hey, this is William Tincup. Listen, we did a series for iSolved called Heroes of HR, where we talk to HR practitioners. And these are just your run-of-the-mill, everyday, slogging it out, 300 employees in Cedar Rapids, HR pros. Mostly it's centered around iSolved and what they do with iSolved, but also they talk a lot about kind of the day-to-day rigor of HR. If you're curious about that, search for Heroes of HR wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.
But it definitely sort of, gives, it can sort of be inspirational. Like you can use it as there's an example of something we could talk about or something we could do. I think it's, again, I'm kind of glass half full about it, but it's impressive kind of how quickly it's advancing and kind of the types of things that it can do, even in the creative space. But again, I still don't think it replaces human creativity, and I don't think it's going to.
Yeah, I mean, part of this, I think, gets into the debate around, using technology where you should, not just where you can. And so I think there's some element of that. The other, to your point about like, it's, these things are pretty good or makes mistakes or whatever. I had another storyteller who's coming out with a book around why, human storytelling is such a uniquely human trait. Like, cause you want to be like a really good, writer who tells compelling stories. There's a lot of, sort of humanity and a lot of the true innate human attributes that come through in really good storytelling. And a lot of the AI stuff, yeah, you can get the task done, but there's this I forget how he described it, but like, it's just like designing for the mid. It's just like, okay, if you want like an average paper, if you want an average job description, if you want whatever your creative pursuit is, if you want it to sound like a human could have written it, the average human, yeah, it's fine. But if you want to be, a best-selling author, if you want to really tell, a true human story, I mean, that's really difficult to replicate.
My book is a great example of this. I wrote it before generative AI was really out, but I wrote it 3 times. Why did I write it 3 times? Well, I work with an editor that she helped me with my last book. Her name's Janet Goldstein. She's amazing. I worked with her on my last book. I made the, colossal error of writing another book before I really like worked with her on like, what's that book going to be? So I sent her that draft and she was like, yeah, like this is pretty good. Like this would probably be like the mid AI version of a book if I had like just written it with AI. But she's like, yeah, the second rewrite of the book was taking this like raw material and going like, okay, what's the, like these shifts weren't really in, like I talked about these shifts, but like I hadn't really kind of crystallized like what are the shifts. Okay, so we did one rewrite that was really around like let's get this content into a much more sort of consumable way to sort of teach the lessons that you're trying to teach. Okay, so then I rewrote it with that guidance. All right, and so then I sent that version to her, and she's like, yeah, like where are you in this book? Like what? Like how did it? I'm a big storyteller, so I tell both of the prior 2 versions of the book had a lot of stories in them, but they weren't really stories about my own transformation using these things that I'd learned. And so the third rewrite was like, go back and talk about your own story and how these lessons impacted you. And I'm not saying this is going to be like a, best-selling book, but that's my fault, not Janet's. But the book is just light years better than what I first sent to her because of that. And that is, AI is not going to figure that out. Like I had to personally transform. I have to be able to tell the story of that transformation. That transformation happened in, meat space. So like I have to be telling the story of like what was happening in my life. And that is a way more compelling book than what an AI is going to come up with. And so I completely violently agree with the storyteller guest that you had on, that like that's how humans like move each other, how we persuade, how we grow is through stories. And we have since we first like were on this planet, and as long as we're around, like that's still going to be the way that you move. And I I'm not saying that AI can't sort of kind of replicate that, but it's not replacing it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, Joe Laser is his name. I think he's got a book coming out, and he's working on a bunch of things. But yeah, he's great. He's got a newsletter that I try to read as well.
I'd like to.
So yeah, I'll send you a link to it. But the creative process that you're using, I think one of the things that people need to think about is if you're going to use it in this process, I mean, you've got to figure out where in the process and what role you sort of want it to play, right? To your point, I mean, if you can't come up with those human stories to begin with, so how do you think about it in terms of helping to either generate or refine ideas or refining the writing itself? Like, do you see it with that? When we talked last time, it was like, if you want like a bad first draft to play around with, that's one way. And then, but you could potentially use it in sort of an editing kind of capacity as well to maybe strengthen some of your thoughts. That's still your original thoughts, of course, but then, just sort of tweaking that a bit.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, generative AI wasn't really a thing when I was writing the book. It kind of like came around, like ChatGPT, I think got released after, or maybe like just around the time that I did that third rewrite. Okay. But subsequent to that, so in like the lead up to the book launch, and we do a lot of training programs, and I did a total revamp of our kind of flagship workshop on leader approachability. And I have for sure taken advantage of AI tools. It is really useful to be able to say, here's my book. You like read it. Here's some training that we've done in the past. Read it. Here are some tools that we have developed over the years for supervisors to use. Read through those. Now, once you've read through all those, we have an interactive discussion where, about help me come up with 10 different like role play scenarios that could help teach some of the lessons that are in this material. And it's super useful for that kind of work where I could come up with 10 scenarios. To be honest, my 10 scenarios, are probably going to be maybe even like more mid than what you're going to get from the AI, because it is looking at a lot of different things besides just the content that like I have in my head, because that's the stuff that I put in there. And I obviously like research, and I have the internet available to me. So like I could come up with other ways to sort of do what the AI does, but you can just go like, hey, spit that out. Now, 6 of those 10 are going to be garbage, but there'll be like 4 diamonds in there that you don't just like copy and paste and are like, okay, well, here's the role plays, but it's like, oh, that's a really good idea for a role play. Now I'm going to write up a role play that's based on that idea. It's super useful for stuff like that. Things like, writing prompts, like look at all this material and give me, 52 journal prompts, and like, boom, it spits them out. Now, again, many of them are bad, but lots of them are going to be great. And, that gives you, and then like, it's so much more efficient than banging your head. And again, like I said earlier, like, brute forcing your way into some of that stuff. First of all, if you're like me, just the mere thought of like, oh man, I have to go like brainstorm all these scenarios. There's a lot of people that like that hurdle by itself is just, that's the brick wall that you never get over. There's probably lots and lots of really like important, valuable writing projects that never happen because getting that, crappy first draft done is like really hard to do. And AI can do it for you. Yeah. It's not going to be great. It's not going to be what, you would, but it's something to work off of. And if that's what it takes, I mean, if again, sort of looking glass half full, there's lots and lots and lots of ideas and lots of content that probably never would have seen the light of day because that sort of initial hurdle is pretty tough for people to get over, that now you can just like get right past that and then get into refining that creation. I think that's exciting.
So I completely agree. That's why I'm so anxious for people to look past like the automation and the efficiency examples and look at where I think true differentiation and value creation can occur, which is augmenting our own, thoughts and ideas. To your point, I mean, there's someone I follow on LinkedIn who publishes a lot of thought-provoking, experiments that he's doing and use cases and academic papers and things like that. And one of them recently was around basically combining, if you pull in all that data that would otherwise just go off into the ether or collect dust or not be sort of interconnected with other thoughts, if you could pull all that together, even across your own sort of universe of information, right? Like I've got stuff in Evernote and I've got stuff in iOS, Notes app, and I've got Notion database and whatever, but like it's there. I mean, I like the structure and I like the interconnectedness of some of that, but right now it doesn't have the intelligence to actually go and make those connections that you wouldn't otherwise see. It's not that we wouldn't, as humans, sort of observe potential connections, but it's so much information and there's complexity in that in terms of the strength of different relationships between ideas and concepts and stuff that's been published, stuff that's still on a post-it note, those kinds of things. And like, so the way that it was described in this example was, instead of problem solving, which is important unto itself, problem finding. Like, how do you combine things such that it can actually identify this nascent sort of white space, opportunity, and how these seemingly disparate things that you jotted down or that you discussed in a meeting with, in your case, your editor or someone else that you're maybe a co-author that you collaborate with. How do you pull all that together? So part of this is having the AI go just beyond what your human brain can sort of hold together at once, and just presenting that to you in a way that sort of creates this light bulb moment that would otherwise just disappear.
Yeah. And I think we've all, I mean, anybody that's involved in sort of creative, pursuits, we've all had those moments, right? Where it's like, oh, wow, this thing connects to this other thing. And it's, it's serendipity, but you can use something, like AI to be on the lookout for other connections like that you don't have to like come up with all of them on your own. And again, like there's a lot of them that you probably like wouldn't have ever connected, that the fact that, so I'm the same, I've got, I got all kinds of notes. I've been like really trying to be disciplined over the last couple of years, and like everything goes into, I like Bear is the note app that I like to use, but like, so everything goes into that. I've got a to-do list, so that's in Todoist, but like that, so those are kind of like the two places that stuff goes. But I really try, like if I run across a link that I'm interested in, or if there's an article that I think is good, like I really try to be disciplined about getting that into the note app, because it helps me sort of make those kinds of connections. Now I haven't taken the giant leap of like getting all that into something that AI, is sort of digging around in, but I'm sure at some point I will. And I'm sure at that point, it's going to connect some things that I never would have thought of that will become work or product, or, or will spark an idea that could become part of a training program or whatever. And I think, I think that that's great. I still am going to want to do that with just like friends and peers and colleagues. Like, it's not going to replace that, but it just adds like this extra sort of place. And I'll be really glad that I am such a pack rat, when that happens, because there's, I have decades, you can tell, we both have, white in our beards, but like I have decades of that stuff and articles that I've written and stuff that I probably even have forgotten that I wrote that can be a source of those connections. So that I think that's going to be game changing.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I'm optimistic. I agree with you, and because I haven't, my career has been anything but linear. So across all of these disciplines, some of them are brought to bear now. Some of the things that I did across my career at IBM and NBC and earlier, not just like formal work, but like side projects and stuff like that, but everything around, like knowledge graphs and connecting and finding expertise in places that you wouldn't have otherwise known that expertise existed, because I can look across a knowledge graph and say, oh, I'm actually, we actually have mutual, connections, or this person's only, 3 degrees away from me, and they just wrote this paper that relates to this project I'm working on, and like all these things. And so, and then you've got concepts around, crowdsourcing and collective intelligence and social media analytics, like, understanding and deriving insights from unstructured, data. Like people don't have time to go into all of these things. So if you can just extract all of that and then have it reveal and literally help you visualize, how these things relate to each other. I mean, I'm a visual person, so I guess it depends on how you like to learn and absorb information. But for me, that was tremendously useful. And now you layer AI on top of that, and it just seems like the potential is just unlimited.
Yeah, I mean, like there's not enough hours in the day. I've got Google alerts that come in every day, from Google Scholar, of papers that have been written on leadership topics that I follow closely, that I want to see what's the latest out there. And so I haven't signed up for it yet, but like, they just released, I think OpenAI just released a version that basically combs, academic papers and like sort of does the research for you, and then tries to make some of those connections. But if I had a place where I could just, and so like I get the Google alerts, I basically don't read them. I know that there's papers on there that are some related to approachability, for example, and I will like get to them at some point, which I rarely ever do. But it would be amazing if I had like a place where those were going, or like it was actively like looking for that stuff, and then could summarize, briefly, like, hey, here, and is also smart enough to go like, yeah, this one's not relevant to like what I am interested in, even though it talks somewhat about the topic. This one is really relevant to the thing, and like here's a brief summary of what it says, which could then like alert me, oh wow, that looks like a really interesting paper, I should take the time to read it. Whereas right now I don't ever get to that point, because like I have to go do all that work, and there's not enough hours in the day.
Exactly. I mean, some of this is, I think you're talking about the deep research.
Yes.
Yeah. That's incredible technology that people seem to be raving about. I actually know that, I think Google has a project called Deep Research, and now OpenAI has one too. So they need to get more creative with these names, but certainly the name makes sense.
They're not using AI to like come up with the names,
exactly.
I guess.
Well, you need human creativity for that, right? Oh.
Right.
But I do think it all ties to sort of this, using AI, the concept of using AI as a thought partner, like your second brain kind of thing, because there's only so much that we can focus on and pay attention to, and we've got limited bandwidth, and energy consumption aside, AI does not have such limitations. And so if you can have that insight at the point of need and where it makes sense, like in the moment, I think that's tremendously valuable. One of the things that I think about a lot, and I've been exploring for my own work, just even with this podcast. I mean, I haven't written a book yet. It's on the bucket list, but just in terms of, taking long form content and repurposing it in different formats and different sort of, more digestible, chunks. There's a lot of folks like myself that are trying to take, so this show, the transcript for the show will be, however long it is, 45 minutes to an hour, conversation that can be repurposed based on the different, topics that we cover. It could be, video that we're recording. It could be audio only. It could be, in text form. And, if you want to, publish and post in on different platforms and different formats and things like that, the act of doing that is something that is very time consuming. And I know AI can help do that, but I would want to go through every single one and make sure it actually, the AI has been trained on my sort of personal sort of voice, and it actually sounds like me, and I tweak it and take out words that make it sound like AI, wrote it.
Yeah,
I would want to look at it all. So that's potentially time consuming unto itself, but still probably saves me as a, content creator, quite a bit of time. But I'm sensitive to everything that we're talking about and everything that Joe Laser and I talked about too, just in terms of the authenticity of the voice. And, my social feeds are filled with everyone who wants to, take all that off my plate and show me like just this crazy, growth that I could have. But I've seen some of those things in action, and I don't like them, and I don't want that to be how people think of me. So it's just, I'm sensitive to those things.
I think humans are going to get better and better at sort of like parsing through stuff to find authenticity. And I know that like there's, it's kind of a game to see like, can you fool, somebody on was this generated with AI or not? But I do feel like that we're going to sort of have to and will like develop that ability of like, how real is this?
Visionary voices, bold breakthroughs. This is Shally's Alley, where top recruiting minds spill their best kept secrets live every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Raw, unfiltered conversations on sourcing, hiring, and the future of talent, where we ask the tough questions no one else will. Tune in and level up.
And so I think that'll be part of sort of discernment that we will develop as like this technology advances. But I think like that sort of connects to the leadership point, right?
Yep.
So in the book, one of the things that I talk about, so I talk about these different shifts that I personally made and that leaders need to make in their kind of their own mindset and how important that is to leadership. But like a key component to that is authentic relationships. And that's like the fourth shift is you got to believe in the power of your relationships. And those aren't, and like the way that AI sort of plays into this is something we talked about earlier, which is like, if I'm so busy, just like, Neo in the Matrix, just like dodging bullets all day long, I don't have time to go like truly connect with my team. Right. And so one of the promises of these tools is that that's that sort of higher level thing, kind of like storytelling, right? That's that sort of higher level thing that really only humans can do, that needs to happen on a more regular basis, that it's one of those things that gets sort of like left on the cutting room floor because there's just not enough time to get to it. It's like my Google feed, right? So that I think is some of the promise of the technology, is that it gives us more opportunity to connect. It's a place where you can, like, going back to this idea of there's humps that are hard to get over. Like a lot of leaders who haven't been trained and we unfortunately often make the mistake. This goes back to the tight labor market. It's like if one leader leaves, we're just like looking around like crazy, trying to find somebody who like shows up to work regularly and is pretty good at their job, and we're like, oh, congratulations, you're now a boss. And there's no training, there's no, there's nothing other than just like, okay, now you wear a different color shirt, or you're at a different level on the Slack channel, and like congratulations, you're now a leader. And that is, when you do that, that person feels like, I don't want to approach this other person on my team. Like, this conversation is going to be uncomfortable. I'm going to avoid that conversation. Like, you're going to avoid actually connecting with people because it's hard. And so that's another, I think, really valuable use of tools. Like, we will say anything to the computer, right? We'll write anything on Reddit. So I can actually practice a difficult conversation with my like coach, because I also am that new supervisor. Like, I don't want to look like an idiot to my boss, and I'm not going to go in and tell him like, well, it's your fault that I suck at this because you didn't train me how to do it. Like,
Right.
like that's none of those conversations happen either. So I just kind of sit there and don't lead. Like, that's sort of that's the default position for a lot of people. And so that creates this giant vacuum of leadership. It kind of ensures, I mean, look, there's a lot of companies that have basically, as it's like not a bug, like it's a feature, is that we are going to have shitty managers. Like, everyone's experience is going to be bad because they have a leader that doesn't know what they're doing. Like, it's just programmed into the way that we like advance people in the company. And that's terrible. Now, AI, can supplement some of that. Like, you can get some coaching, you can practice a conversation, you can get yourself comfortable to now go have that conversation with someone on your team without having to go to, necessarily go to a class or have to go to your boss. Like, you can practice that. It's good to go to a class and sort of get some basic tools in your toolkit. But when it comes to kind of like role play, it's a great tool for that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot of promise for leaders as well, taking advantage of these tools, both creating maybe a little bit more space to be able to do the hard work of leadership, but also like get better at it.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a lot of the frankly, the value creation that I see inside organizations, because to your point, some of these, and there's a lot of solutions that I've seen already in this space, in the talent and HR technology space, that relates to some of these capabilities. And so when we talk about, AI powered, coaching and mentoring tools, in some ways, those can supplement and augment, what leadership can provide to individual contributors, but the leaders themselves can take advantage of those things to make them more effective as well. I mean, it's not restricted to just, replacing some of the functions of a traditional, manager or leader. It can make you more effective while it's making your employees more effective at the same time. And so when we think about that from a leadership development standpoint, from a talent management standpoint, I think those things are important. And then you also hit on some of the more cultural and behavioral things as well, where I think AI can help, because, those sometimes, like you said, those people are thrust into those managerial or leadership roles based on their maybe skill level or tenure, not necessarily because they've exhibited any particularly good leadership qualities. So if you needed to put someone there because you needed a new leader and you didn't want to go external, and you were just, sort of insular in terms of how you sort of move people up into those more senior roles, you want to make those folks, well-rounded. You want to make sure that they're maintaining good relationships, because the dynamics, as you alluded to, the dynamics change now among those team members. And so, yeah, there's a lot of area where it can help, but also some areas where I do understand where there's some people have some reservations, I suppose.
I think, just to sum that up, I think that it's got a lot of promise for leaders. And I think that, we need to be thinking about those of us sort of in the leadership space and those of us who do lead, teams. You have to be thinking about, how do I, take advantage of these tools and take advantage of these opportunities that I have to, grow my relationships, grow my impact. Those are really important things to kind of be thinking about if you are a leader in an organization, or you're somebody who promotes leaders in organizations. Because at the end of the day, the kinds of companies that I'm talking about, it starts at the top, right? You have to be super committed to developing good leaders, or it's just not going to happen, right? It's one of those friction things that, I've got a lot of other things that I'm supposed to do that I'm getting judged on that are way more visible than whether or not I'm having good connections and conversations with my team. And so that is what I'm going to concentrate on. And, so a company really has to invest in their leaders. They have to really view it as something that's important. The companies that do, they ultimately over the long term have way better results because they have stronger cultures. They have people that are fully committed, that are going to work harder and are going to work faster and better. Organizations that have leaders that are approachable. We've done a lot of research in this area, but if you have leaders where people feel safe and comfortable coming to their boss, you're going to get more suggestions. Those suggestions can be game changing in terms of your quality or your productivity or your profitability. They're going to warn you of problems when they're molehills versus a giant mountain that you somehow now have to tackle.
Sure.
And they engage in organizational citizenship at a much higher level. So they just help each other out, which creates a much stronger culture. They don't quit.
Right.
The turnover intention drops by 75% if you just say my leader's approachable. Yep. So there's massive business benefit to getting this right, but it's not easy. And that's why a lot of companies don't take advantage of that. And then they fall behind.
Yeah, exactly. Phil, this has been fantastic. Congrats again on the book. I'm looking forward to diving in, but you've given us some good teasers for what to expect. So looking forward to that. I will make sure to put a link to that so people can pre-order it in the show notes of this episode. And thank you again for your time. This has been great.
My pleasure. Great conversation. And, I spend time thinking about this, but I don't really get a lot of time to talk about it. Michael, who introduced us, he and I probably spend the most amount of time sort of batting some of this stuff back and forth. But yeah, fascinating conversation, and I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Phil. And thanks everyone for listening. We will see you next time.